Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Tax Matters. How has your week been and how is business going? We do hope that as good citizens of Nigeria, you are fulfilling your obligations as taxpayers, both in individual capacity as well as with regard to business activities. We do know that the FIRS has renewed its enforcement activities against tax evaders, even as it sharpens its eyes to detect tax avoiders. Last episode, we shared with you the first part of our interview with Mr. Ezra Zubairu, Coordinating Director, Enforcement Support Group at the FIRS. We will be serving you the second and concluding part today. And our aim is to let you know that it is no longer business as usual at the FIRS.
Do you provide goods and services? Then you must answer these important questions. Are you registered for VAT? Do you charge VAT on the goods and services you provide? Do you keep records of all your transactions? Do you file VAT returns? Do you remit VAT collected to government coffers? If your answer to any of these questions is no, then you are breaking the law. The law demands total compliance. Therefore, you must register for VAT. You must charge VAT on goods and services. You must file VAT returns. And you must remit all VAT collected on behalf of government within 21 days to the bank nearest to you. To do otherwise is a crime punishable everywhere in the world. VAT is prescribed by the law. Do the right thing. Collect and pay VAT. This message is from the FIRS. It pays to pay your tax.
Mr. Zubairu, welcome once again.
Thank you and welcome viewers.
What does tax investigation entail?
Now, tax investigation is a detailed, in-depth examination of the books of the taxpayer. That is all the tax affairs of the taxpayers. Now, there are different forms of inquiries. We have what we call the desk examination or desk audit, which is carried out at the various tax offices, be it a large tax office, medium tax office, micro and small tax office, or a government business tax office, or even a stamp duties office. Now, they are the focal officers that have the first interaction with the taxpayers, and they examine the returns filed by the taxpayer. And when the taxpayer, it goes beyond the aspect of the desk examination, then from time to time, tax audit can routinely examine the books of the company. Now, tax investigation differs slightly with the tax audit and the desk examination or desk audit, as we will call it. So there's a slight distinction in those aspects.
So what is the slight distinction?
Okay, the distinction first and foremost is the legal framework. The legal framework in the FIRS Establishment Act, makes a distinction between tax audit and tax investigation. For the tax audit is covered by Section 26 of the FIRS Establishment Act, and then for the tax investigation is covered by Section 35 of the FIRS Establishment Act. Now, basically, tax audit is a routine examination of the books of the company or taxpayer, as the case may be, whether it's an individual or a corporate entity, to ensure that they substantially complied with the provisions of the relevant tax laws, be it company's income tax, be it personal income tax, be it value-added tax, NISDA, education tax, and all other taxes in place, and any other regulatory requirement that that very business entity is required to maintain. Now, for tax investigation, what they do is, first and foremost, the trigger is different. While the tax audit is a routine exercise, for tax investigation, normally there has to be a trigger for which a company should be investigated. And they are normally categorized into three main areas: what we call tax fraud, or willful default, or neglect. So if a taxpayer if the tax authority is of the opinion that the taxpayer has committed tax fraud or has willfully defaulted in his own tax declarations or his tax obligations, or neglected to do what he is required to do by the provisions of the tax law, investigation sets in. The other difference also is what we call the audit or this audit or investigation cycle. Normally, by the standard provided by the FIRS, the audit cycle is for 60 days. Now, meaning that from commencement to end, to assessment and payment, it is expected that and the audit will have been concluded within 60 days. But for tax investigation, the cycle ranges from up to 180 days. That's 6 months. So that's one other difference. And then there's what we call the statute of limitation, meaning that tax audit can only examine the books of a taxpayer for the 6 preceding years. That is the limit for tax audit. But for investigation, there is no limit. As a matter of fact, if the company is even 100 years old and the tax authority is of the opinion that that company should be investigated for those number of years, they can go backward as much as that. And then the outcome of the inquiry for tax audit is compliance. They want to make sure that the taxpayer comply. But for tax investigation, it may not only entail compliance, it could also be issue relating to prosecution of the taxpayer.
Now, you also have in your group the Compliance Research and Risk Management Department. What have you found to be enablers for tax compliance, and on the flip side, discouraging factors?
Now, the Compliance Research and Risk Management Department, as it is named, focuses more on researching to ensure that anything that is needed for the taxpayer to comply is carried out. All the measures, all the information that they will need to mine to ensure that taxpayers comply, and they mine this information and provide them to the field offices, that is the tax office, the tax audit, and tax investigation. Now, they mine this information from the various sources that are at the disposal of the service. Now, after that, there is also the risk management aspect. And the risk management is actually divided into two: compliance risk and institutional risk. Now, the compliance risk is that very risk which makes it evident that the taxpayer may not comply with either his registration obligation, his filing obligations, his payment obligations, and accurate reporting. So that is the compliance risk. Then the institutional risks are those very risks that are more encompassing: issues relating to external threat, issues relating to threats within the service, either unionism, either issue of capacity of the taxpayers, or some other factors that are extraneous, like this NSAS protest, these issues relating to COVID. So those are institutional risks which this department focuses its attention on. Now, there are enablers of this very risk. First and foremost is even the education, the environment in which the taxpayers operate. Now, those are basically some of the enablers of this very risk.
All right, now talking about the discouraging factors, we also want to know how you're managing or mitigating the discouraging factors to get those who do not want to pay their taxes.
Well, generally speaking, and worldwide, everybody knows good governance is part of it. if there's good governance, and we work in our own remit to ensure that we get, starting from our own level, to ensure that we make the environment conducive for taxpayers. Issues relating to multiple taxation are also those discouraging factors which we are also working to ensure that it is reduced to the barest minimum. And we have a forum, the Joint Tax Board, whereby the Federal Inland Revenue Service and all the 37, including the FCT, state revenue authorities meet from time to time and come up with policies that will help to harmonize the entire tax system. Now, we are also, some of the discouraging factors are also the high cost of compliance. So we bring up issues of technology to see that all those people that are having issues relating to compliance are able to leverage on technology to comply. We're also trying, in respect of the elimination of obsolete tax laws. And since 2019, the federal government has been coming up with Finance Act. Now, this Finance Act comes up to, help the taxpayers, removing all those obsolete laws, and then coming up with also the laws that will help the taxpayers make compliance easy and incentivize the business environment to enable compliance to be much more easier.
We know that two things have stood out from the beginning of 2021 as driving the process at the FIRS. One is the renewed emphasis on technology and automation, and the emphasis on indirect taxes over and above direct taxes. So how is your group supporting these initiatives?
What we're doing now is we have, like one of the various departments, we're automating our operations, where even the investigation process is being automated, such that the investigation cycle where we said we might be in the premises, we might continue to carry out that investigation for 180 days, might be greatly eliminated. Because if we're able to operate, we have virtual meetings, we have information supplied by the taxpayers virtually. Now, it will help to, trim down the cycle. And there are other departments also that are automating their processes, like the debt management, even the legal is also automating its process. And the compliance research also is also keying into this, such that all the information that they will need in respect of compliance research, in respect of risk management, they're able to generate this information virtually, and they're able to share this very information in the same manner and obtain feedback, in those very manner, and see what actions can be taken to mitigate risk, and then actions that can be taken to ensure that taxpayers comply with their filing obligations. Now, the service-wide, there are what we call the 6 solutions, that have been developed by the service in terms of to aid. All these are electronic solutions to aid taxpayers in compliance, in complying with their filing obligations, and in aiding them in their ease of doing business. The electronic registration of the taxpayers, where a taxpayer, without having to come to the tax office, is registered online. I have mentioned the aspect of the fact that Corporate Affairs Commission, when you're incorporating a company, you're automatically registered. So that's one other aspect that has been taken care of. Now, those that have not been registered by the Corporate Affairs Commission can also register from their own offices or comfort of their homes. Now, issues of filing of returns also is another area. There is electronic filing of returns, there's also this aspect of electronic payment of your own returns. You don't have to go to the bank with a teller. You can make your transfers using the various platforms, payments channels that have been made available. I know there are about 4 or even more channels in which taxpayers can pay their taxes without having to get to the tax office or go to the bank. And then we also have receipts. When you make their payment, receipt is generated automatically and sent to your mail, and you download and print your receipt. We also have what we call the electronic stamp duties, where you pay your stamp duties online without having to go to a stamp duties office. And the other electronic solution we have is the electronic tax clearance certificate. We all know that issues relating to tax clearance certificate has been a sore thumb in our system, but the management of the service have come up with this very solution such that if you need a tax clearance, you do not need to go and drop a physical copy of your application for tax clearance. You can just download the form, fill, and send it to the appropriate tax office that is handling your tax affairs, and they will process your tax clearance. And once your tax clearance is out, you get your tax clearance in your mail. And the most novel idea that management has also introduced in respect of the tax clearance has to do with the fact that even if you are owing, we can still give you a tax clearance certificate so long as you come up with a repayment plan of the outstanding taxes, which is agreeable by both parties. So you can see it is now easy for you to obtain tax clearance without tears. And all these various solutions you can see from end to end, you can operate without having to have a contact or go to the tax office. And it also aids in the ease of doing business.
Now, I also want you to tell us the measures. I know you've been talking about technology, the e-solutions. Now, the measures put in place to enhance the collection of VAT, stamp duty, and other indirect taxes.
Well, there are a lot of measures that have been put in place by the service to aid in the collection of taxes and the payment of taxes in the fulfillment of tax obligations by taxpayers. And like I said, I've just mentioned the issue of the electronic, and then we also are engaging taxpayers significantly to ensure that they have the right information from the right source. And we go to our website. Our website has been further upgraded. So when you go to our website, you see many other services that we can provide, and a lot of information at the disposal of the taxpayers that will aid them in compliance, that will aid them in the ease of doing business, and many other as they interface with the service. So you have because information is key, for compliance. So that is one other area that and for us in the enforcement support group, one other area we are focusing our attention on, because while we are trying to make things easier for taxpayers, we still have taxpayers who are not willing to comply. So the measures the enforcement support group is doing is beginning from this very year, we will begin to prosecute tax evaders. We will prosecute companies who are found to have evaded taxes, and we will join the directors of that company as if they are the ones who committed that offense personally. So we will join them and prosecute them once we have enough evidence to prove that they were involved in tax evasion or tax evasion schemes. So that is one area the division or the group is focusing its attention on for this very year. So it will send a deterrent effect for those who will not want to comply with the provisions of the tax law.
Okay, thank you, sir. Now, we would like to know if you have collection targets for these indirect taxes in the short term and in the long term. I also want to know how you plan to achieve these targets.
We have collection targets, even though the main focus of enforcement support group, as the name implies, is not really collection. But that doesn't mean that we don't have targets. We have targets also. And the management is also very serious about it, because the government also needs these very taxes to be able to, meet its own mandate to the citizens, to the populace. One of the things we focus on is to focus more on these areas relating to prosecution, like we've said. We have not been doing it, but like I said, and for the benefit of our listeners and those who are watching us, that we will start to prosecute tax offenders this year. And we also want to make sure that debts are collected, assessments that are uncollectible are collected as soon as possible, and whatever means that is provided, whatever is method that's provided by the relevant provisions of the tax law, we will employ to collect. And the legal department is there to ensure that those very companies and their directors are prosecuted jointly and severally.
Finally, before we let you go, sir, yes, we know that technology seems to be one of the strengths you're deploying in achieving your targets. We also want to like to know if you have any challenges in achieving these targets and how you will tackle.
Every organization, every department, every group, every staff has challenges. And the major challenge we have is the fact is because we relate with taxpayers, and that's why we are here. Now, the fact that taxpayers are unwilling, a lot of taxpayers are unwilling to comply with their obligations in respect of registration, in respect of filing of their returns, in respect of payment, and in respect of reporting accurately their transactions. And government comes up with a lot of incentives. Like last year, there were a lot of waivers of penalties and interest. There were even extension of time within which taxpayers should file their returns, and many other palliatives like that. But surprisingly, only very few took advantage of that. You can remember in the past, there was this tax amnesty that came up. There was also what we call VAT, and only very few taxpayers took advantage of it. But one of the things we want to do to address this is what I have earlier said, and I will still repeat again, that we will really come up with measures this year that will serve as deterrents to would-be offenders. We've come up with a lot of initiatives, and we also focus, for instance, more on transaction taxes, because those taxes have actually accrued. Those taxpayers are liable for payments. Those transaction taxes, especially the value-added tax and withholding tax, because these very incomes have been earned. So the issue is for them to remit those things to the tax authority, but quite a number of taxpayers fail to do. The other challenge has to do with funding. You know, no matter what you do, you will still find funding gaps, you know, based on what is provided. And for FIRS, it's even much more challenging because it is like the case of a predator and a prey. If a predator does not catch a prey, it will die of hunger. We are funded by the cost of collection. So if we do not collect the taxes that are needed or mandated, then there will be nothing for us to pay our bills, to pay the staff salaries, and fund the operations of the service. There are equipment challenges. The other challenge has to do majorly, which is national challenges, like the NSAS protest, because it's a national challenge. The global challenge, we are COVID. So all these are some of the challenges we have. And we also will look inward to ensure that staff have the right attitude for doing their work. So if we are able to overcome all of this, I believe things will be much more better for us, not as a group, but as a service.
Thank you very much, sir. Really appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
As we said at the beginning, the FIRS is stepping up its enforcement activities. And as you heard from Mr. Zubairu, it is in the interest of the service because it is work and eat for the FIRS, as the service is run on the basis of cost of collection from non-oil revenue that it collects. And it is also in the interest of the whole country, as we need tax revenue now more than ever before in the face of dwindling revenue from our major exports, crude petroleum. Thank you for riding with us on today's episode of Tax Matters. Remember The 23rd Annual Tax Conference will hold in Kaduna from Tuesday the 18th to Friday the 21st of May 2021. Have you packed your bags? Have you booked your flights? Have you booked your hotel? See you next week and see you in Kaduna.